Therapists of Reddit. What was your "you must be kidding me" moment? Story 1 intake clinician here. What brings you in today? I'm here for addiction. At this point, not the weirdest thing I've heard, let's go with that. Okay, tell me about it. I watch it 3 times a week, for 15 minutes or so at a time. My girlfriend said I'm an addict and forced me to come in. I see lots of very extreme cases, but this was so minor that it made me stop for a moment. I sent them to couples counseling. Story 2. One client of mine bites and eats his fingernails. Gross, but not unheard of. Then I learn he stores his fingernails in a box in his room to save them for a snack later. A little grosser, but he's about 9, so I'm hoping he will grow out of it. What finally made me want to vomit was learning that when anyone in his family clips their nails, fingers or toes, they give him the clippings to add to his box. So when he's eating nails from the box, they could belong to his mother, father, or siblings. Yes, I've addressed the parents about enabling this behavior, but it is still happening. Edit. Thank you all for your concerns for my client. I'm aware that it seems like pica or some sort of nutrition deficiency, and for all I know it could be. I'm a behavioral therapist and not qualified to professionally recommend medical treatments to the family. I do know his parents have taken him to several doctors for multiple different tests for disorders, so this could have been addressed and they just choose not to disclose the information to me. Story 3. Had a client who we found out was storing his own under his bed. He would then eat his for a snack. Edit. So I guess I should have added why he did this. First issue. He thought he was an alien. So eating his had a few benefits in his mind. First benefit, we could not study. His second benefit, he felt that alien had nutrients he could not get from our food. He would eat normal food, but we found out he felt Earth food was poison and alien fixed. That third benefit, alien is worth a lot of money, so he did not want us to steal it. When we found out what he was doing, I gotta inform him that we were taking away his. He kicked me. Story 4. One that sticks out in my mind was a mother that brought in her 5-year-old for therapy because she was into Disney princesses, which are clearly sexual, and since a 5-year-old is non-sexual, this must clearly mean she's being sexually abused by a close family member. I've also worked with countless couples who have come to counseling for adultery, where in adultery, one client even became suicidal because she caught her husband jerking off after not having with him for months. I know everyone has different values, but come on, y'all. Story 5. A client was going to probate court and thought he'd dress up by putting a non-slip sock on his collar as a tie. Trying to be supportive, I told him, "Nice tie." To which he replied, "It's not a tie, it's a sock, stupid." Story 6. I used to work with children that have autism and Down syndrome, which means a lot of play therapy. I had my moment when one of my clients wanted to sit on my lap while we practiced reciting animal cards followed with their corresponding noise. Forgot what animal noise I made that made him laugh so much that he ended up peeing on me from the laughter. That night was also date night. Story 7. Just today, I conducted a threat assessment on a first grader who told his teacher he wanted to stab himself with a knife and die. Upon further questioning, he revealed that he and Dad watched The Walking Dead together, and last time on the show, he saw 2 people stab themselves to death because they didn't want to get eaten by the zombies. Why are you even watching that show with a 6-year-old? Story 8. I was working surveillance one night at a psych ward, keeping a close watch on a mentally ill patient. Right before my shift started, I was briefed that the patient had started eating one of the light bulbs and attacked a nurse. At around 5 a.m., he woke up and saw me aiding there at the end of his bed. I said good morning, and he didn't reply. About 15 minutes of silence went by before he stood up and stared out the window and said, "A person is most vulnerable while taking a..." I didn't sit back down for the rest of my shift. Story 9. Social work, not therapy, but close enough. Me. We need to think of some new ways for you to discipline your daughters other than spanking. Client. But my parents did it to me and I turned out okay. Me. Stares at this high school dropout drug addict who has spent his entire adult life in and out of jails and halfway houses. Can't get a job and had his 3 kids removed for abuse and neglect. Okay. I actually did successfully turn this around in a gentle way and make him realize he hadn't actually turned out okay. Story 10. Not a therapist yet, but I'm currently taking a counseling and therapies university course, and we occasionally hear some stories from our professors in lectures or tutorials. One sticks out in my mind because I'd never seen an entire class shocked into silent horror before. A guest lecturer told us about a client he had who used a craft knife to cut open his own and took out what was inside because he wanted to look at it and play with it. Story 11. I had a client, an older female refugee that I worked with for several months before she told me that she had court the next week and was worried because she could be deported if found guilty. She didn't tell me earlier because she was ashamed and suffered in silence. She was living with extended family, and the family got busted for smuggling and selling cat, a stimulant narcotic. The family determined that she would take the fall for her husband and sons who were behind the operation. At the arrest, the police brought an interpreter for a different language, from a different ethnic group, in a different country than the client was from. On top of that, she said the police didn't have an interpreter present during the questioning at the station, and she waited there for almost 2 days until they found an interpreter for her language. I asked her if she understood what was happening, and she said her lawyer, public defendant she met once, told her she would be deported. Beyond that, she had no understanding of the situation, process, etc. I had seen her psych eval stating that she had the cognitive equivalent of a 7-year-old, so I told her that we have information that could help her case and that her lawyer should see it as soon as possible. This was on a Friday, court was on Wednesday, and the client didn't know the name or any information about her public defender. We got a friend to help her collect the information. The client brought it to me on Monday, signed the ROI. Lawyer called me back that afternoon saying they've got nothing to help this poor woman, even though the case seems completely set up. I told the lawyer that we've got a whole bunch of insight and data and records that will get the charges dropped. I didn't work Tuesdays and was going nuts worrying and hoping everything would get to where it needs to, and in the hands of the people who need to see it. On Wednesday, news from court comes that all charges were dropped. I used to get all kinds of sprung on me at the last minute, then have to perform all kinds of bureaucratic trapeze maneuvers to alter the outcome of high-stakes situations. I wrote so many letters. I was hired to be a mental health provider, but I ended up doing tons of case management because nobody else wanted to. Story 12. Have a master's in clinical psychology and currently working towards my doctorate. I laughed reading this question because I feel like I have at least one of those moments per day at my clinic rotations, regardless of type of setting. One that stood out the most was when I was working a camp for children with various psychological disorders, most with some sort of behavioral concerns. The girl I was paired with had a history of aggressive and violent tendencies. We went the whole day without any problems. That was until we were doing some group physical activity to wind down and focus before leaving for the day. She didn't like that this meant no longer playing with a certain toy, so she took off her shoe and threw at the little boy in front of her. He had autism and immediately started crying and screaming. While someone helped him, I turned to the girl to explain to her what she did was wrong. As I turned towards her, she punched me square in the face, then grabbed a hold of my hair. Managed to pull out a good chunk? I'm about 5'1", and this girl was maybe 1 or 2 inches shorter than me and had about 20 pounds on me, despite being 9 years old. Trying to get a safe physical restraint was difficult and comical to say the least. Finally got some help from other staff and we were able to calm her down after about 15 minutes. The kicker was when we told her mom what happened, she basically dismissed the entire thing and laughed about it. So frustrating because you just know this kind of thing is reinforced at home as there is no punishment. The girl then starts hitting her mom, who grabs and holds down her arms. The little girl laughs, looks at me and the other staff member and says, "Ugh, a little help over here? Are you going to let her do this to me? She's hurting my arm." I went home and did this weird laugh cry for a few hours. Luckily, you learn pretty quickly not to take things personally and move on. So things were back to normal the next day. I do occasionally look back at that day just baffled at how quickly that whole situation escalated. Most of the other moments that come to mind involve in some capacity. Story 13. I work in a community residence for adults with mental illness. Most of them are very capable and independent. One girl, 27 years old, constantly acts really dumb for sympathy and will do dumb things because she can, I guess. First week, she was admitted she tripped on something getting out of bed. She's 5'1" and like 200 lbs, and she fell on her foot and broke some of the small bones in the foot. I take her to get her cast and she gets the usual, "Don't get the cast wet, use your crutches, elevate, blah blah." Since her bedroom was on the 2nd floor, we had to send her back to her mother's house for a few weeks since she would not be able to exit the building in time in case of emergency. Well, 5 days later, the shoe boot thingy to put over your cast comes in and we call her up saying, "We'll bring it over." Her response, "Well, I don't think it'll fit." "Why not?" we ask. "Because I cut my cast off. I got it wet and it was too tight." They didn't give her a second cast and she never used her crutches, claiming they were unstable and she would fall and get hurt if she used them. Her foot never healed properly and 2 months later she fell and broke it again. Edit. Since you all have questions. 1. She didn't get a second cast because A, she would have to pay for it herself and she didn't have the money. B. Doctors did not want to give her another plaster cast, fearing she would just cut that off too. Other options for a cast insurance wouldn't cover. 2. Yes, being 5'1" and 200 lb is severely overweight. Many times people with mental health issues come from low-income backgrounds. Often people with mental illness are overweight due to lack of good health care, know how to lose weight themselves, and inability to purchase healthy foods. 3. I can tell she acts stupid on purpose for several reasons. Mostly that when she thinks we're not watching, she slips up and behaves normally and makes actual intelligent decisions. Also, she's told us she thinks guys like her more if she's stupid, and she gets lots of sympathy from people for how stupid she is. 4. To the person who said she might likely lose the foot. She's told us she wants her foot amputated because then it wouldn't hurt so much. Logic. Story 14. My client told me his family didn't appreciate his interest in guns, to which he proceeded to tell me he is always carrying. He then places his gun on the table in front of me and asked if it made me nervous. It did, but we focused more about why he wanted to know if I was nervous, and it brought it back around to his family. From then on, I made sure to always have access to a door and never put the client between the door and myself again, just to be safe. Story 15. This recently happened to me. I have a client who is a daily methadone doser. During our last session, he complained of sleep issues. Delving into this new issue, he described his solution to me. He saves his spit in a jar to drink at night when he is unable to sleep. Saves his spit in a jar to drink later. Story 16. I'm a therapist and have a few of these stories, but this story was actually told to me by a therapist friend of mine. He said that he was working in a mental hospital a few years ago, and he and other staff heard a loud scream from down the hall. They ran to go check it out and got to a patient's room to see blood all over his face and hand and realized he had torn his own eyeball out. They tried to defuse the situation and start looking around for the eyeball. They couldn't find it. He had eaten his own eyeball. Edit. I don't know the reason the patient gave for eating and/or removing his eye, but I will say it takes a pretty severe level of psychosis for a person to be able to do this. Honestly, he was probably more concerned about the reason he needed to take his eye out than he was with the pain of it. I can't imagine the emotional pain he must have been going through to be able to get to this point. I am a therapist for children who have been sexually abused. I could tell you some stuff that would disgust you even more, but I assure you no one wants that. Story 17. Doctor I used to work with told me about a woman who tried to commit suicide, so they put her in a safe room. She then proceeded to try an overdose on water, which he told me is possible but really hard to do. Story 18. Physical therapist. Intern back TN. Old lady with dementia. I was walking with her in the hallway where visitors are as well. She says her pants is falling off. She can't use her hands to pull it up. She has a rollator where she takes a lot of support. She's wearing a skirt, check it, and I say, nah, it is okay. She says it again. I say again that it is okay. 10 sec later, a diaper full of drops to the floor, almost making her fall. Prevent that, but she dragged it a little bit and spreading the all over the floor. It smelled horrible. Story 19. Worked one summer at a summer school for special needs children about 2 years ago when I was 14. I was just a teacher aide, so most of what I was doing was playing with the lower maintenance children and just running errands for the teachers. One morning, I was helping the kids put their stuff into their cubbies, and one of the kids was just standing in front of his, staring at me with his lunch bag in his hands. This was one of the more violent kids who would act up at the slightest of breezes. He was about 11 or 12 and had severe autism. I asked him if he needed help putting his stuff away, and he replied with only some mumbling. I asked him to speak clearly, and he said, "I'm going to hurt you." I was really confused and asked him to repeat what he said. He then screamed at the top of his lungs, "I'm going to hurt you!" and swung his lunchbox straight for my head. Luckily, I kinda expected this kind of thing to happen, so I was ready to duck, and he missed. I was not allowed to even touch any of the students because I was not trained to restrain them. So, until the teachers got him under control, all I could do was run around the classroom as he chased me until the teachers got him under control. Once the teachers restrained him, he was under control within about 10 or 15 minutes. When the teacher asked him why he did what he did, he said that he was angry because his dad didn't bring him to Denny's that morning. I was assaulted because a kid didn't get to go to Denny's. Story 20. I'm a speech therapist. That counts, right? And I see this little kindergartner who also has massive behavior issues. We are working on language and pragmatics because he enjoys calling people stupid fucking bitches and little dirty whores and disgraces, most likely for attention. He will walk around the room calling me a stupid, a smelly, and repeating the word until he runs out of breath just to see if he can get a reaction from me. I would work on articulation with him because he doesn't actually say those words correctly, but I figured best to work on that later after I've got the swearing and name calling down to a minimum. Story 21. I'm late to this thread, but forensic therapist here. I work with paroled offenders. One time a guy I worked with urinated on my coworker's car in broad daylight. She was in the car. He made eye contact with her while he was doing it. His PO picked him up from group 20 minutes later. He's current having a little vacation at a state facility. Story 22. When I worked in bereavement, a client of mine used the term skid marks when discussing the accident. For some reason there and then, the expression just caught me off guard. I joined the dots, and the corners of my mouth started to rise. In actuality, this may have only lasted a moment, but it felt like minutes. All the while I was drawing blood as I chewed down on the insides of my cheeks. I felt like the worst human being alive. Story 23 was running an addiction treatment group. Some of the participants were referred by the court, usually for a DUI. The referral conditions were simple. If they finished treatment, they would not serve time in jail for the DUI. One of these court-referred DUI participants ran a limo service and showed up to group with a tablet and cell phone. He spread things out and proceeded to treat the space as his personal office. I intervened, explaining he would not be able to conduct business while participating in the group. He gave me a look that would have killed an ordinary person, said it was a busy time of year and he really needed to stay in touch with his drivers. I told him I understood, but he still needed to put the stuff away and pay attention. Lots of eye-rolling. I can't believe this lady. And he still kept checking his phone and getting up to go outside and take calls. During the break, I told him his behavior was disruptive and he would have to leave. This seemed to make him happy, until I added, I would be telling the judge he did not complete treatment. For the first time, he seemed to slowly realize he was there for a reason and might actually end up in jail because of his behavior. He apologized and asked to stay, and he settled down after that. Story 24 had a patient who swallowed things as a self-injuring behavior. This individual would swallow anything metal and pointy, usually as a way of getting into the hospital or to stay in the hospital. At one point, they wanted to get surgeries or procedures to have the objects removed, but they weren't actually suicidal. One instance where they almost died after ingesting a series of closed safety pins that ended up opening inside their stomach stopped them from eating things that wouldn't pass. Anyway, so this person was upset that they were getting discharged as they wanted to stay until the beginning of the month. Hate to say it, but it's not uncommon to see people come in because they are out of benefits for the month. The usual complaints of being suicidal weren't working, because we know this person isn't actually suicidal. So they went and swallowed the iron from the Monopoly game. It didn't work, we still discharged them. But ever since, we haven't been allowed to have board games on the unit without staff supervision. Story 25. Teenager comes to session. Tells me they broke into their neighbor's house just for fun by smashing a window. Said they browsed their CD collection and weren't impressed with all the Spanish music. Said they searched the house for money, and when they got to the second floor, they heard a shower running. Someone was home. Teen ran out and went home and baked a lemon meringue pie and returned to neighbor's house to give it to them as a gift. No answer at the door. Discussed needing to have a doc assess teen about mental health hospitalization. After I make the call to the police, teen asks to use washroom. Sure, kid seems calm with what's happening. Then teen bolts out of the office. Police did find them later when they showed up at their parents' office to borrow $20. Psych ward for a month. Story 26. The scariest thing that ever happened to me was when my best friend had a mental break. He believed in a delusion that he had died, and that all his friends and family weren't really his friends and family, but beings constructed in our likeness, and we were not to be trusted. He reflected deeply on all his wrongdoings, big and small, and was convinced that he would go to after this purgatory that was trying to mimic his life, but wasn't actually his life. It's a very helpless feeling when you look into the eyes of someone you've known for over a decade and see that they don't recognize you. I was ill-prepared and ill-informed of how to approach his mental break. Do I meet him halfway? Yes, it's possible that you've died, and this is the afterlife, but everything you had before is also here, and everything you wanted to achieve can also be achieved here. Or do I shut down his delusions completely at the risk pushing him away? No, you are not dead. This is the real life that it's always been. You never died. I was with you the whole time. You have a mental slip that needs to be addressed. I worried over the possibility of him getting curious about how dying would play out in this afterlife delusion of his, and then hurting himself to test out his theories. I was worried that the person I knew was gone, and I was going to help rebuild a stranger. He started reading all these crazy papers and articles about alternative universes, and fell into a depression caused by the thought of hurting his real friends and real family in the parallel universe where he has died. He picked apart his faults with such scrutiny that I worried his self-worth would never recover. He started speaking about me in the third person because I wasn't his real best friend. He punished himself for transgressions long past and picked apart every normal selfish human behavior he had. How do you convince to your best friend that he brings you joy and not hardship in your life? I found it so hard because friends don't keep tallies of good deeds that the other one has done. He kept begging me to tell him about a time, any time where he made me happy. All those small things I cherished, Christmas gifts, inside jokes, a favorite movie we like, a restaurant we enjoyed, a trip we shared, good memories I had together, and private words we exchanged that lifted me up when I was sad. They seems like trivial answers. He reacted as if they were inconsequential or found reasons that the examples I pulled were wrong and were actually examples of his cruelty and manipulation. He was convinced that our friendship was nothing more than him manipulating me, taking advantage of me, and motivated only by his selfishness alone. But it wasn't like that at all. I couldn't find the right words to explain our relationship, our love, and our friendship. I visited him in the psych ward every day. One day he came back as 100% himself and was able to process what he experienced through clear eyes. But then he would be gone again, this time angry at me because I had tricked him somehow. I became the devil in his delusion. My "here we go again" are the moments right before I would see him in the psych ward and wonder if he was going to be my best friend that day or that someone else. And if he was that someone else, we spent the next 4 hours debating whether he was dead or not and explaining who I was and what happened that night where he thought he died. Sometimes it would bring him back and sometimes not. Mental health is such a difficult illness because it's not like a wound you can see heal or a tumor you can remove. You can't physically see the improvements, so you get worried by every setback being a leap further away from recovery. Story 27. I work as a residential aide in a treatment facility with a clinical team, so closely tied to a therapist, but not one. I generally think, you've got to be kidding me, when my coworkers leave all the paperwork for me to do on my shift and do crosswords on theirs. I'm looking at you, Jeff, you lazy bag. Story 28. I'm physically non-monogamous. I'm afraid my boyfriend is cheating on me with his female friends, both from the same person during the same conversation. Story 29. Had a client who was told he absolutely had to start losing weight, else he would become troublingly diabetic and begin losing appendages. He didn't put much effort in, eventually having his foot amputated. Time after that I saw him, I had to explain that having a foot amputated did not count as half a stone towards his weight loss targets. He was genuinely mortified. Story 30. Not a therapist, but I was a volunteer for a school for special kids. And this hyperactive kid of age 7 started raping an autistic girl who had no idea what is going on. Story 31. Had a patient once with auditory hallucinations. They suddenly decided I was the voice, and they had to do whatever I said. So I encouraged them to do positive things for others. And always be nice to their mother. Story 32. Crap. I'm late. Mom and Dad are both in counseling for sexual addiction. Dad is into, stepmom is into anything that moves. Daughter, 11, was raped repeatedly by her real mom's friends. Parents are constantly watching in front of daughter, and she sees multiple people go into bedroom and leave quickly. Parents wonder why daughter is very hypersexually and got kicked out of school for groping every boy in her class. Story 33. Not a therapist, but this is definitely a WTF moment. I had to go to school consulting once. I was there because the fire alarm in the building has ring 3 times that night. Once was a drill, the second is around dinner time, and the last one is around 3. I snapped at the last one and threatened the kid who caused it with a baseball bat. You know those stupid indoor fire alarms. Anyway, I was sent to one session of counseling because, you know, antisocial behavior and all that. Anyway, there was this dude who also in for therapy. It was a group thing. The counselor asked him why he was here. He said he was here because he was caught by his roommate fucking a warmed-up shepherd pie, which was not his, in the kitchen. All of us seriously just stopped and stared at him, like he wasn't saying this embarrassed or nothing. He just matter-of-fact said he fucked his roommate's shepherd pie. Story 34. I am not a therapist, but used to see one for my severe anxiety-related issues. I have been seeing her for a while and my condition was improving a bit. No longer hyperventilation during normal day-to-day stuff is a major win for me. A year ago, we decided to meet up at a nearby coffee shop because her office was renovating. So we meet up. Usual stuff. She asked me of my current condition, and I report to her the weekly chart I made, which contains what gave me anxiety. She would give me a few pointers on CBT, but me being a forgetful, I would forget that and freak out in most situations. Here is where it got a little weird for me. We moved on to the subject of my history, and mind you though, I have been only seeing her only a month. I told her about how I was sexually harassed by my teacher when I was young, and then when I told my parents about it, they did nil regarding that matter. On top of their face that I have an alcoholic father who beats me and my mom. All that time, she just sipped her tea and stared downward at the floor and dig her nails into her fingers plan while she clenched her hands. Rinse and repeat for 10 minutes. All of a sudden, I heard sobbing noises and sure enough, she was crying. I was shocked. My mind froze like an ice cube, and she explained how she had a baby brother who died around my age, 20, and how when she was growing up, her brother would withstand abuse from his father and was eventually strangled by the dad, while her brother was protecting her from the psycho father. While this was happening, every eye in the cafe is on us, even the staff who stopped dead in tracks. I could hear muffled voices which speculated how much of an I was, thinking I was breaking up with a woman. My mind and heart was on overdrive. My anxiety kicked in, which opened the amusement of horrors of sinking hearts, panic attacks, and why are you scratching yourself? Couple that with my stuttering, My whole conversion was like this. Me. Puh. Leah. See, ma'am. Don't cry. I am so RRRRRY. At this point, there was no point talking to her since her head is buried in her arms, crying, arms folded on top of the table. I hurriedly apologized to everyone, paid for the coffee, and suggested to her that we should get out. I paid for the lift and days later got a call that she would refer me to a colleague of hers while she apologized to me about the incident. I thanked her, and not wanting her to get a second breakdown, wished her Godspeed and drank my strawberry milk while I contemplated whether she was testing me or not. TLDR. Therapist had a breakdown in front of me which gave me a perceptive that everyone got problems. Story 35. My mother and brother made me go with them to family counseling. They mostly discussed the issue that I didn't watch the news with them, and I'd rather watch Home and Away or Neighbors. I was 13, and that I didn't know anything about politics. I flat out refused to go after 2 sessions of the 3 of them ganging up on me and telling me to be more involved with their interests. What 13-year-old girl likes discussing politics? Story 36. Not a therapist, but was sent to one in elementary school. So basically in elementary school, I had a problem where little things would really bother me, and I would start crying. No idea why, it would just happen. Everyone in the class thought it was hilarious and would try to get me to cry throughout the day. At some point, I get signed up for the school therapist, but I was convinced it was a conspiracy form. All of my classmates picking on me, they were trying to wrongfully convince the school I needed to be put in special ed, when really, they were just messing with me. So in the sessions with the therapist, I would just talk about nonsense until she let me go. Not sure what she really thought of me. Story 37. I provided therapeutic counseling rehabilitation services for people with brain injuries. At a family conference, I was trying to explain to the family that they needed to accept their son brother as he was in the moment, and that he was not going to get much better than he was. They were being unkind to him, calling him stupid, etc., and generally being the worst version of family support imaginable. The family said they would never accept him as he was and demanded that I arrange a brain transplant for him so that he could go back to the way he was before the accident. I didn't react, but my student lost it and started laughing uncontrollably. She had to leave the room. The family was outraged at her and demanded to know why she laughed at them. I literally had to explain that 1. Brain transplants are not possible, and 2. If a brain transplant were possible, that would mean putting a different person into their son's body. They didn't grasp this and insisted I could do it if I wasn't too lazy to do my job. I felt so bad for that poor young man. Story 38. I had this Scottish guy continually mistake the occupation as the rapists. He had a foul mouth too and talked a lot about my mother's sexual proclivities. Not sure why I kept inviting him back. Story 39. Saddest WTF moment. Saw a woman who presented for anxiety in the emergency room. Interviewed her and found out what was making her anxious. The listening devices that had been placed around her home by the government. The lady had psychosis, possibly related to a recent pregnancy, although that part was not certain. And she had 2 small children and had been going more and more quietly psychotic, and her husband hadn't noticed. Very painful situation, but I'm glad we got her help. Funniest WTF moment. Also from my ER experience. A guy who was high on a cocktail of substances ran into a staff area, took the fire extinguisher off the wall and started filling the hallway with it, and then started shouting the lyrics to Sympathy for the Devil. It upset another patient who was waiting admission for schizophrenia, and he freaked out and started saying, Satan, Satan is here, and tried to run out of the front doors. It's the most chaotic situation I've ever been a part of. Story 40. Here's the sort of responses you're going to get here. 1. People making the rapist jokes. 2. Not a therapist, but stories. 3. People who aren't therapists, but claim to be in order to tell made-up or partly true stories for karma. 4. Small chance. An actual therapist who decided to break patient confidentiality for a random thread on Reddit. Story 41. Taking this from my old post. I am a foster parent who temporary houses kids. It started one morning when I was using the bathroom. As soon as I stepped in, I began to smell a very pungent odor. I searched all over the bathroom, yet I could find nothing. Last I looked into the towel closet and found little scraps of toilet paper that looked normal, but they smelled awful, so I tossed them out. This was happening every single day. I could not figure out what was going on. Fast forward 2 weeks. One night, I hear the foster kid using the restroom, which is kind of odd because it is very late. Once he's back in his room, I quietly tiptoed to the bathroom to see what he was up to. A very strong odor of poo hit me while I walked in. I knew to look right in the towel closet, and there it was. Pieces of poo sitting on toilet paper. I was shocked and did not understand why these were in here. I flushed them and went to speak with the boy in his room. When I opened the door, he was sleeping, so I figured I would talk to him in the morning. Morning rises, he is downstairs eating breakfast. I decide I am going to check the bathroom to see if anything else happened since he was getting ready for school in there and was taking a long time. Once I go into the bathroom, I check the closet. Seems to be fine, but I spy his backpack laying there. Kind of odd this was in the bathroom, so I decided to open it and take a look. I was not ready for what was in the backpack. There was a t-shirt that seemed to be wrapped around something. The t-shirt was slightly moist. As I slowly unwrap it, my mind goes blank with what I see. The t-shirt was hiding a huge collection of poo. Why, just why is this boy collecting his in his backpack and taking it to school with him every single day? Why was the shirt moist? I call downstairs to the child and ask him to come up here. Minutes pass, he is nowhere to be seen. So I start looking around for him. I find him in his room pulling out from under his bed kitchen paper towels with one piece of on each of them. We kind of just stared at each other, no words being said. I ask him what the is he doing. He says, paper towels don't stick to it and tear off. At this point, I am super confused. He's been doing this long enough to find a better method of what paper to wrap poo in? Then I ask him about his backpack. Why does your backpack have a wet shirt and in it? I don't want it to dry out or be too mushy, so I use the shirt with a little water. Like what the refuses to really talk about it, won't answer the questions I ask him. I had to lock the towel closet because I keep finding sitting in there he's drying out to put in his backpack. He started putting them under his bed. He can no longer have a backpack because he keeps restarting his collection and carrying it everywhere with him. It's crazy, I do not know what to do. Edit. Hey, all just throwing in an update on this. He has started hiding it in between his mattress now. We have had to throw out the bed springs along with the mattress. He had an incident when he came home and found out we got rid of his poo. He angrily looked at us and on the floor. Blew me away, had no idea what to do. So I just sent him to his room for the rest of the day until dinner. While at the table, we tried to talk to him, but he won't acknowledge any subject about the poo collection. Seriously was so weird. Look us dead in the eyes and on the floor.